Okay.
Yeah.
You're on.
All right. So we will start this meeting. I don't know if Zariah Hightower, Ward 1 City Councilor, has joined us yet. If you have, make your presence known. Okay.
Luke,
So
you're muting yourself, Luke.
Yep, Luke should be muted. That's good. What I want to ask is if we could, what we need to do first is we don't need to approve any minutes because this is a brand new committee. And we have an agenda that folks have seen. I think there was one slight change to our agenda, and that is to add a, after the presentation regarding Cambrian Rise, a brief high-level overview from Luke McGowan, the CETO director, about the some upcoming initiatives around the recovery portion, sort of the economic recovery. Would that be a good summary? Luke, nod yes or no? Good. Okay. So that will be added. I think we need 10 or 15 minutes on that. It'll be coming to the council at a upcoming meeting, maybe even this coming week. So I thought it'd be good for us to have a chance to at least discuss that. And then we're going to discuss the upcoming priorities, committee priorities for the upcoming year. So there's a public forum, and I'm new to this. If I'm playing a role in recognizing you, bear with me because I haven't done this yet. But will they be raising their hands? Ian, is how we decided to do it.
So, you know, I didn't get any emails from people ahead of time that wanted to make a public comment. If you're listening on the phone, you would need to, you can email me right now at ijakus@burlingtonvt.gov. So I'll spell that out. ijakus@burlingtonvt.gov. And I can, if you let me know your phone number, I can allow you to talk. If other people would like to talk, you should be able to raise your hand. There should be a
recognize hands raised. I think I can see them over there. I know that I set it up that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
I also recommend using the chat function.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Yeah. And you'll see someone already posted in the chat just saying hello to Zariah. So keep an eye on that.
Okay. Great. All right. If somebody on staff could monitor chat, it's going to be hard for me to participate and chair the meeting and also look at chat. So if you could just note when somebody is asking a question, that'd be helpful. Thanks, Ian.
Okay.
So this is public forum. This is an opportunity for the public to speak to our committee about any issue really that they're concerned about. It doesn't have to be on our agenda. Public forum is really an opportunity for the public to share their perspective, their concerns, their questions with members of the committee. So, you seeing anything yet on chat which makes you?
I am not. No one has. One comment. How about the CD&R paperwork from February that wasn't addressed?
I think we're going to have, that's something we're going to come back to when our committee meets next as part of our sort of work plan that we're developing tonight. But I think the question is about, we had a number of tenant protection issues that were being discussed in earnest and were postponed in February due to a family emergency that I had. And so our committee did not meet in late February. And then we had the election and a newly constituted committee, and COVID has slowed things down quite a bit. So we are, we still have all of that information. There's a question, do you still have your copies of the letter that was written? The new committee members need to receive that, Ian. So if that's material you could share, material that was submitted at those meetings, so you can, that'd be great to get us started again. But that's very much on the top of our committee assignment and our committee agenda is to get back into that discussion. Ian, is there anyone who's called or emailed or anything else regarding public forum? That looks like Ian's frozen. Oh no, he's there. Okay.
Oh, sorry, I have not received any additional emails.
Okay. Great. So the answer to the question about what we're going to take up the tenants' rights, tenant protection issues is very much so. That's at the top of our list as the committee begins to plan for this coming year. Tonight, our agenda is to hear a brief presentation by Eric Farrell, the owner and developer at Cambrian Rise, to bring a request to the council at an upcoming council meeting in the next, I think it's not this coming week, but the following week on the 18th of May. So what we'll do, I think, is transition to that. If members of the public want to weigh in at some point, we will, since this is sort of a new process that all of us are trying to understand and get comfortable with, we're not going to close discussion off, but I just wanted to move from public forum, I think, at this point. Councilors, are you okay with moving on to the presentation? Good? Okay. All right. Eric Farrell, I'm going to pass the mic over to you and ask you to tell us about your request and your rationale for the request and what's the process going forward from here.
Okay. Do you want to see any visuals, or do you want me to just chat about it for a moment?
I think a high-level overview, and then maybe go through some visuals. That would be what I would think would be helpful.
Okay, so I'll try and be brief so that it doesn't fit your definition of a big presentation. I'll make a small presentation. So I have been involved with Cambrian Rise with Burlington College started in 2012. And we originally were going to redevelop that half of that parcel, with the college staying and expanding on the other half, which didn't last long. They imploded soon after we made our deal. Entirety of the property. And so we went through about a year, a little more than a year process to negotiate a development agreement with the city, and the players in that process were Jesse Bridges representing the mayor's office, Gil Livingston, who was then president of the Vermont Land Trust, Michael Monty, who is at CHT representing the nonprofit community, and myself representing BC Community Housing. And so, you know, we talked at length and ad nauseum about how that property should be developed, and the outcome of it was that we sold 12 acres to the city, including Texaco Beach. The nonprofits each, Champion Housing Trust and Cathedral Square, were each able to purchase a lot for development on their own at a huge discount. And we agreed that the entire project would be subject to 25% inclusionary requirement, whether it was for sale or for rent. And the planning office rewrote, basically created a new zoning district. It was pretty similar to the NAC district, the Neighborhood Activity Center district, but specific to Cambrian Rise. Then we went through, we had about 40 some odd public hearings, including the formal part of the process, and several MPA meetings with 2, 7, and 3, or 2, 3, and 7. And we, after a couple of years, or a year and a half or so, we did finally get permits. And for the entirety of the project, 14 buildings, 770 units, about 1 million square feet, mostly residential, about 50-50 split, or not quite, between rentals and for sale condominiums, although it's not prescriptive as to what that mix is. And then we started, and we occupied Liberty House, former orphanage, in 2017. We were scheduled to open the first new building of market rate apartments on May 1st, got delayed when the world turned upside down. We think we're going to deliver that building around the middle of June. Champlain Housing Trust opened their Laurentide building last October, 76 units of subsidized family housing. Cathedral Square was delayed a little bit. They were originally scheduled to open this fall. I'm not sure what the revised schedule is, but it's probably late fall, early winter for 70 units of senior housing. So I started a dialogue with the mayor's office last summer, reached out to all of the city councilors back then to answer questions and provide tours of the property, those that hadn't been there. And I think all but one or two did take tours. And so my request is pretty simple. In the development agreement, among all the other commitments that we made, there's a cap on density, 770 units. There's no otherwise cap in the underlying zoning district. The zoning district's controlled by floor area ratio. Essentially, you can build 2 times, you can have total building area 2 times the lot size. So in theory, we could build 2 million square feet. Right now, we're approved for about 1.1 million. And the other dynamic that's going on here and elsewhere throughout the country is that units and homes, they're generally getting smaller. So we don't want to build any more than the 14 buildings we're approved for, but we want to build more units within those buildings. Some of them might increase to the height allowed under the new ordinance, which is 75 feet. So there'll be a mix of 4, 5, and 6-story buildings. The taller buildings are closer to the lake to take advantage of the fact that the site drops like 60 feet from North Avenue to the bike path. So I've been asked by a couple of counselors that I spoke to recently whether or not I was asking for any other kind of relief from the council, and I am not. I'm strictly asking the council to amend the 770 number in the development agreement to 950. We would otherwise be subject to any and all zoning, planning, and regulatory requirements that are applicable to our zoning district. And the long and short of it is I want to build more housing. And as a result of the 180 unit increase, 25% of course will be inclusionary, which means instead of doing 193 inclusionary units at Cambrian Rise, we'll be doing 243 or 245, 25% of 950. So that's a benefit. And I think the mix will still be very roughly 50-50 between home ownership and rental, including the nonprofits. And that's the long and short of my request.
Okay, before we get into questions, I have one clarification. Initially, you had some commercial uses. Are you replacing any of those commercial square footages with residential under this request, Eric, or is this really just within the footprint that was initially permitted as residential, staying residential?
Well, it's not strictly within the footprint because the footprints of the individual buildings tends to move around a little bit because we went in and got a blanket approval for 14 buildings. And as you can imagine, you don't design those buildings right to the nines because it would be prohibitively expensive to do that. So we got a blanket approval. We represented the number of buildings in the streetscape and the overall flavor of the community that we want to create. And then every time we're going to build another building, we go in and we might tweak the colors of the windows or the fenestration. And sometimes we've added a floor or not. And so we did have, we had like 125,000 feet of non-residential space that included a boutique hotel. I think that we have no expectation that we'll end up with a hotel at Cambrian Rise, given the condition of that industry, which isn't likely to improve very quickly. So we think we'll end up with less non-residential space. We do want neighborhood commercial uses that would serve the residents that would live there, and it would certainly have some, street traffic like a cafe and primarily service uses. We're going to move our office there. I wanted to get my office back in Burlington for many years. And so I think the long answer to your short question is that I think we'll end up with less commercial space than originally conceived. But it is a mixed use district. So if somebody comes out of the woodwork and wants to locate a non-residential business there, and we thought it was beneficial for the community, and then we would entertain it, but we're not entertaining any of those uses presently.
There was a question that just came in from the public are there any 2-bedroom units that would be more suitable for families, or are you still sticking with 1-bedrooms and studios?
The Liberty House is 1 bedrooms and studios. The building we're about to open is the same. The next building we're going to start midsummer is going to have a mix of fewer studios, a lot of 1s and 2s. And I think CHT has a mix of primarily 2s and 3s. They probably have some 1s. Senior housing is probably mostly 1s, I'm guessing. But we have a couple of other buildings in the near planning stages, and I think you'll see more 2s, a mix of 2s, maybe some 3s in those buildings. But it's really responsive to whatever the market demand is.
And then lastly, the people often don't think of the inclusionary requirement as applying to homes and units that are purchased for sale. But I think could you just speak a little bit about how many there will be that will be for sale units through Champlain Housing Trust?
Well, there's, so let's say theoretically we build 950 units, and let's say 500 of them are apartments and 450 of them are condominiums or home ownerships. So 25% of those 450 would be 187 units, if that's what the math is, would be home ownership units, and they would be marketed at 75 to 80% of people who are at 75 or 80% of median income for our statistical area. So, but more specifically, in the first condominium building we hope to start this fall, we signed a contract with CHT. They're going to buy 18 of those units, and then they will resell them as inclusionary units. And we had a recent conversation with CHT about another 40 to 50 unit building that we hope to start next spring of inclusionary units, probably fronting on North Avenue next to Liberty House. And that would likely be predominantly 2-bedroom units, some 3s, probably not a lot of 1s, because their biggest market is for home ownership is 2s and 3s.
Okay. And one last one. We're getting a lot of questions, but there's one more about will the retail be more sort of catering to the community, the residents living in that area? Is that what you're thinking, sort of?
I think the retail is more likely to be service related than pure retail. Like, you're not, bad example, but you're not going to probably see a shoe store there. You might see a beauty salon, a cafe, maybe some kind of a service business. I don't think that will attract a pure retail store, unless it could be a food store, like a small boutique grocery store, perhaps. But Jake's in the New North End being an example, that's a small, really nice store that just opened. But I don't think you're going to see a traditional clothing store or shoe store or pure retail. Maybe a bookstore.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to let the committee members start to ask whatever questions they have.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi. Couple different things. This is just a comment. I was going to send it. I'll send it after. I just read an article. Vermont, for whatever it's worth, has the smallest household size in the country. We are small households. I'm still trying to wrap my head around what was presented out to the community a year ago and what you're doing now, and kind of the change because you're keeping 14 buildings,
Correct.
you're keeping about the same amount of square footage of all of the 14, but are the new units in what you presented last year in the 770 and you were just making them smaller, or is in fact the new units or the additional units gonna essentially be swapped out or use what you had planned as commercial space?
Not exactly. I think we'll do less commercial, which will make room for more residential. I think it's a combination. I think that, and I think second is that on the rental side, there's no question that the average unit size will be smaller than we anticipated 2, 3, 4 years ago, because that's the way the industry is going. I think condominiums and homeownership units are probably getting a little bit smaller, but not at the same pace as rentals. You don't see a lot of condominiums, studio condominiums or efficiency condominiums. So I think the homeownership units are probably more likely to be, twos and threes with some ones and maybe a fraction of a studio, but not many studios. So the buildings, the number of buildings won't change. Some buildings will get a little bit larger, but they'll grow vertically, not so much footprint wise. I think the footprints we're not locked into the footprints. That's a subject of zoning and planning, but we tend to, tinker with them, the size and shape of buildings. So not even sure I answered your question. Did I answer your question?
Well, I'm trying to,
well,
a year ago you had uses for the buildings, and you had so many people kind of coming and going, either to live there and or to go to work there. And I'm just, maybe this is leading, because I think traffic is one of the issues to talk about, is will more people be going in and out of the development than what you originally planned? Because I appreciate, like, a hotel, people come and go, an office, people come and go, and an apartment, people come and go. And I'm trying to wrestle with, does this, how many more people will be coming and going from the project?
So to the extent that we do more residential and less commercial, then the residential is probably the least amount of impact on traffic. Commercial, different commercial uses. I think our original proposal had a convenience store as a placeholder, which we're not going to do a convenience store. DPW last year asked us that very question, because we had a pretty comprehensive traffic study done when we originally got approved, and we had that same company, RSG, update that traffic study to reflect 950 residential units and less commercial space. And their conclusion was that the impacts would be nominally the same as it was before, as currently approved. DPW vetted that report, and I believe that they accept the conclusions. They agreed with the conclusions in that report. So I think the simple answer to your question is the traffic impacts of what we're asking to do are going to be negligible. I think it'll be about the same as it always was, primarily because we'll do less commercial and more residential. I think that's the upshot, really.
But that's a fair thing for me to say to people, that.
Absolutely. Well, and the other thing you could say too is that I did check recently our household size, and it can change over time, but our household size at Liberty House is 1.6 persons per unit. And we expect in the building we're about to open that'll probably drift down a little bit, because we have a higher percentage of studios to ones. So I'm guessing we'll be about 1.5 persons per unit. And the other thing too, Sarah, that's important to understand about Cambrian is that we don't want people to be in cars. So we have a car share there. We made an extensive investment into bike racks and boat racks and bike washing and bike repair shops in each of the buildings. And of course, we're lucky to be that we'll be able to connect to the bike path, which is becoming increasingly a commuter route for people in season. And we're also on the busiest route of the Green Mountain Transit. And we spent, we can show you a picture of, Jess will show you a picture of, but we spent about $350,000 on a climate controlled bus stop, probably the second nicest bus stop in the city of Burlington. The first one being owned by the city. We got the second one. So it's in our interest to get people out of their cars. So, you know, to the extent that we're successful in that, then that's would serve to mitigate traffic impacts. The other thing that we're doing too, that doesn't necessarily speak to traffic volumes, but we can show you a picture as well. We've been working with DPW for about a year on a plan to widen North Avenue on our side of the street, only for the purpose of adding on-street parking. And we want to do that because because we want to turn our frontage, North Avenue, along our frontage into a neighborhood street rather than an arterial road. And one of the two things you can do to do that, one is you create some on-street parking, and second, on-street parking tends to calm traffic. It just makes it more neighborly, no pun intended, but it'll make it more neighborly, and it'll benefit the single family homes and duplexes that are across the street, because there's no there's no on-street parking for visitors to those homes. So a lot of people, you know, visitors park in the driveway and back out into North Avenue, which is not that's just not, you know, a little scary on a given day. So we think all of, and our plan for North Avenue is consistent with the North Avenue corridor study. So we're pulling out all the stops to try and make ourselves a really beneficial community. That's my
Councilor Hightower, do you have anything for the folks here?
Yeah, and this isn't, I've looked at all the plans, generally not opposed to more small units. I will say that if we're doing an amendment, and I admittedly have not done my homework on it, so I don't feel very qualified to speak. This is my first committee meeting, and it was a busy week, so I apologize. But somebody told me this who lives in the CHT building a few months ago, and I just noticed it when I was at Camry Rise on Monday, is that there's at least one area that's kind of an outdoor area that is exclusive to a building. So maybe there's a few dog parks or something like that where you say you can only use it if you live in this building, which, reviewing the inclusionary zoning policy, I don't know what it looks like now with the new inclusionary zoning changes and having place in different places, but that seems out of the spirit of the agreement of having 25% spread across different buildings than having outdoor spaces that are limited to only some buildings. So I'm very in favor of doing this amendment, but I think I would also like to include an amendment on top of that saying outdoor spaces are for all of the buildings and not limited to any buildings. And I don't know if that's possible for us to do or if that's possible for DRB to do, but I know that I'm hoping to have that as part of the discussion. I know that will be one of my recommendations to add.
I'm going to add before Eric, that's a great point, is what are we weighing here is really the development agreement. And it's unusual for the council, even this committee, to get this type of proposal come before us, because we don't review development usually, and Zoraya knows this well because she's been on the DRB and has reviewed more projects than anybody on the council. But know that those kind of issues are really important to bring, and there will be a chance, of course, through the permitting process to bring those issues to the Development Review Board. But I think that's a great question, Eric. Maybe you can speak to it. Are outdoor amenities generally restricted for building, or are they shared amenities?
Well, I think it's a combination of both. The Cambrian Rise does have a couple of common lot spaces that are. So if you own like a CHT is a member of the Cambrian Rise Lot Owners Association, and as a member of that lot owner association, it shares in the rights and the responsibilities and benefits of being a member. And one of the responsibilities is that we have a shared stormwater system. So as an association, we will charge dues, and all the buildings, including CHT and Cathedral Square, will contribute to that dues structure, and will maintain the stormwater system because it serves the whole community. But if, as far as open space, each parcel has its own discrete open space, and then there are common open spaces in the development. Like CHT has a really nice playground that they developed on their parcel. Well, that playground's not available, it's only available to residents of CHT's building. So I think each building will have its private spaces, and then the development, the community, Cambrian Rise, will have some common elements that will be available to everybody in the community. So it's a mix of both. But it's not going to be where any resident of any building can go and use the common spaces of every other parcel on the property. And each, so I think that your goal, though, Zariah, would be accomplished, but it'll be accomplished by a blend of public and private spaces.
Can you be just a little more specific? Because, I mean, I get in concept. So CHT's built a playground and they own their little parcel. But let's say on the other side of the development, you build a building and you have another play area over there. Can the kids go back and forth? I mean, I think that would be how, I understand that the owner of the parcel, and in this case, CHT, was required and did put in the amenities, but and I think, and I'm saying this not totally confident of it, you have a circumstance where you have two private owners owning each an individual building, and then you have 2 or 3 condominium buildings, which are effectively private owners. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around how spaces can be shared.
Well, I don't think it's realistic to expect that, like I'll use CHT as an example, because they own their parcel and they built a building on it and they developed their own site amenities for the benefit of their residents. So I don't think it's realistic to expect that people who don't live in that building have free reign over their property, and nor do I expect that their residents would have free reign over any of the individual properties of the other condominiums buildings that are sprinkled throughout Cambrian Rise. But that, having said that, we do want to build some common amenities because we are committed to creating community. We create community within our buildings. We create community within individual parcels, and we like to create community within Cambrian Rise as a neighborhood. And a big piece of that, or not an insignificant piece of that, was our willingness and agreement to sell 12 acres of probably some of our primest land, including 1,000 feet of sandy beach, to the city, because they wanted that land. They wanted that land for common use, and so everybody will have access to it. It's publicly owned, but it was originally part of the Cambrian Rise, project site. So I think that was a large step, Zariah, towards that. Commitment to do that. We agreed to do that, and we had that land. We had that land appraised at the time for $3 million and sold it to the city for $2 million. And that was, just all that was due to good negotiating on Gil Livingston's part, let me say. So I think we accomplished both. But I don't think you can expect everybody's property to be common property. I don't think that liability wise, it doesn't really work well I don't think that would work.
Mm-hmm. Sarah, go ahead.
Same vein, the condominium building. So you've got 5 or 6 of those, right? I don't remember exactly how many. Your company's going to own the rental buildings, right?
Excuse me?
Your company's going to own the rental buildings.
Well, we'll own some of them. We don't own CHTs. We don't own cathedrals. Right. And we may not end up owning all the rental buildings in Cambrian Rise. And we won't own any of the condominium buildings in Cambrian Rise.
Right. So that was where I was going was, will each condominium building be its own condominium in effect? will each building that has condominiums in them be their own homeowner association?
Yes.
Okay, so you're having 4 or 5 separate homeowner associations, each one owning a building, right?
Each lot would like, so when we build our first condominium building, it'll be on lot 4, and that will form an association. The association will own the land and own the common elements of the building, and there's 117 units in that building, and so the land will be owned in common by all the unit owners of that particular building. Now that association will also be a member of the Cambrian Rise Lot Owners Association. So there'll be some rights and responsibilities that go with that. We did the same thing behind Shaw's when we did the Odell Parkway. There's like 9 or 10 buildings. Each building is separately owned. They are all on separate parcels. They're all members of the Odell Parkway Lot Owners Association. They have a dues structure, and so it's legally structured the same way.
And because of that, presumably, you could have different management agents for each of those. Well, you will now, with CHT managing their own building, Cathedral Square managing their own building. The homeowners could independently have different managers if they chose to.
Well, the homeowners, so these associations are self-managed, but most of them hire a property management company.
True, and I probably they'll, yeah.
Yeah.
But in theory, they could, and then your rentals will be owned by you or whomever, and you'll manage those, or you'll hire a manager.
Yeah.
Could you speak about the dues specifically? How is it structured? Who pays the dues? Do they get levied upon each resident? Like how does this dues structure?
The Cambrian Rise dues, we haven't started dues. We probably won't start dues for a couple of years. But the Cambrian Rise dues structure, we haven't built. I think we got a rough budget, but it's essentially based on the number of units in on a particular lot. And if there's commercial space, then there's a unit equivalent. So, like 1,000 feet of commercial space might be equivalent of 1 unit of density for the purposes of allocating dues. That's what we did at Odell. Each lot owner, each association, or CHT or Cathedral Square or whomever, will pay dues based on the size and number of units in their building. And those dues will pay for primarily stormwater management and management of the common lot, like lot 6. Jess could show you a site plan if you want to look at it, but there's a common lot. And there are not a lot of common elements. It's basically infrastructure and then the no-build land, no-build lots.
So these
when you say dues, these are really operating costs for shared infrastructure, right?
Oh yeah. It's not it's a nonprofit. It's the Lot Owners Association is a nonprofit. It collects dues only to the extent that it needs to pay expenses, shared expenses, common expenses on elements that they use in common.
So, for instance, Cathedral Square and Champlain Housing Trust will contribute based on the number of units that they have, and that will just be factored in as part of their operating budget. They won't be charged to the tenants per se, although maybe it's part of the rent structure.
Part of the rent.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, for example, there's about half or a little more than half of the project is served by a pump station. Well, the pump station has to be maintained, but it serves multiple buildings. So those costs will be allocated.
Okay.
The Cambrian Rise Owners Association will own the bus stop, the transportation hub. Green Mountain Transit will use it, but it's going to be owned by the Cambrian Rise Lot Owners Association.
And the heating and cooling and maintenance will be handled by Green Mountain Transit for that facility?
Well, we haven't negotiated that yet, but yeah, maybe or maybe not. We haven't gotten into the weeds with them on it, but it would be pretty nominal. We wanted to build a bus stop because we wanted a bus stop there.
Yeah.
We wanted a climate control bus stop. So.
I think we're getting all the questions answered. If somebody sent a question and I missed it, the screen keeps rolling and I may have missed something, so I apologize. Ping me again. Send me another one, please, if you did. Sorry. Sorry, I thought you had something else. Did you have anything else? Or?
No, I think that was it on my half.
Okay. Do you have a few slides that you want to share with us and the public?
We can. Well, Jess, I don't know. This is above my pay grade, so you have to allow to do that.
Yeah, either way, I have slides on my desktop that I can share, or I sent them to Ian. I don't know if he's more comfortable sharing, however you want to handle it.
You're fine to share your screen. Panelists can share their screens.
Okay.
Let's do that real quick. We'll keep it.
I'd share my screen if I knew how.
We don't want you to.
Exactly.
Can we all see that?
Yeah.
So that's our new logo. Okay, so that's the site plan. So you can see down in the middle, Jess, if you want to show them just below where your cursor is, or your hand. Well, there's where the green is closest to the park. Yep, so that's lot 6. That's a no-build lot. It's just a green space. We don't have any particular program in mind for that space, but it would be owned by the Lot Owners Association. And then if you come across Cambrian Way, there's another small green, same concept. And then there's a boardwalk. Now the boardwalk isn't necessarily owned by Cambrian Rise, but it'll be open to the public. It's basically a lookout. It's a hard surface lookout. There's a building below it, a 2-story building below it, which is one of the ways that we cut the grade on the site from east to west. And then, of course, the largest part of the common areas of Cambrian Rise is the park that we sold to the city, including the Stone House to the south. And we will be building the bike path connection probably at the mid to late next year. But then you can see on each lot, there's a little bit of green space here and there that would be owned and managed by the particular building owner or lot owner. Mm-hmm. And then you got some pics too. So that's, this is a work in progress. You're looking northwest. So in the bottom foreground is Cathedral Square's building, currently under construction. West of that is Laurentide that opened last fall. And west of that is the first condominium building we want to build. And then when you go north along this building will open. This is the Rise on North Avenue. We'll open that middle of June. It's attached to externally, but not internally, to Liberty House, which we opened in the summer of 17. North of that, on the corner of where Cambrian Rise intersects North Avenue again, we would like to do inclusionary home ownership units, 40 to 50 home ownership units. We've been talking to CHT about doing that. And then when you go due west of that, we would like to do workforce housing. There's a non-binding, but a commitment in the development agreement whereby we said we would endeavor to do some workforce housing. Workforce housing being loosely defined as not inclusionary, but not high-end. It sort of broadly fits the demographic between 80 and 120% of median. So sort of middle price range. I think when you go west of that building that would be another rental building probably. And then due west of that would be those 2 buildings would be, again, for sale condominiums. The one to the right, the other one, that one might have a component of inclusionary, because if we build 40 or 50 inclusionary units up on North Avenue, we won't quite have reached our total commitment for 25%. So we'll end up with inclusionary units in one or 2 of the other buildings as we go. But it's hard to say very specifically which buildings and when and where, because you know, this is a work in progress. It takes, it'll take a number of years to build out, and we're seeing what the world is doing along the way. Do you have one that shows the bus stop, Jess? Or, yeah, so this gives you a little glimpse of the North Avenue improvements on the west side with on-street parking and the bus stop, and the design you're looking at was all worked out in detail with Public Works. So what you're seeing is what they want. And then on the corner of the Rise building is the transportation hub, which is why the bus stop's there. And that'll be owned by the association, the Landowners Association, but for the use by Green Mountain, Transit, for a climate controlled and hopefully real-time monitoring bus stop. Nicest bus stop in town, at least second nicest bus stop in town.
Can you just share with us briefly the discussion for a roundabout? I know was on the table at some point, and I know it did not work out, but just if you could just share with us and the public why that was deemed not feasible.
Well, Tony Rennington floated that notion a couple of years ago. Why aren't we doing a roundabout? And we had already gotten approvals for an intersection with a traffic light. And I said, listen, I'll do a roundabout, but I'm not the guy to ask. If you make a presentation to DPW, and if DPW thinks that a roundabout would better serve that intersection along North Avenue, then we'll build a roundabout. And at the end of the day, DPW did not want a roundabout there, nor did the fire department. And so we weren't opposed to a roundabout, but it wasn't our call as to whether a roundabout was built there. And at the end, and the city said, no, they don't want a roundabout there.
It just wouldn't fit. The geometry would not
Well,
work. Right?
not a big one. I mean, if you did a real roundabout, you'd need a radius of 110 feet, and it would be way overdone for the amount of traffic on that intersection. And minis don't really work. The fire department doesn't like them because they're not really conducive for trying to get emergency services through the intersections like that. So yeah. But bottom line is, if that's what DPW wanted and the city told us to build one, that's what we would have built. But in the end, they didn't want one.
Will there be a light at that intersection?
Absolutely. Yes. At this intersection, it's a horseshoe street. There will not be a light at the northern intersection, but there will be a light at the southern entrance. Yeah.
I had a question that also a citizen posted on our chat here. How does this on-street parking work and dovetail with the bike lane on North Avenue? Does it? I just want to make sure that obviously if DPW approved it, they thought of that as well. But
well, the bike lane, yeah, you see the cars that are parked, and then inside that is a grayish paved area. That's the bike lane, so it's separated.
Okay, thank you.
So bikers are not, yeah, and then inside, and then there's a little green space, and then there's the public sidewalk.
Helpful, thank you. Yeah.
And that's the boardwalk, which was originally going to be the top of a parking deck with parking spaces, but after visiting the site myself over the last 2 or 3 years, it just seemed like a crime to put parking on top of that deck. So we're going to try and do something along the lines of what you see, because you can see the lake from there, and it's a great vista. And I think on a given summer night, it'll be a pretty popular sunset place, or a place to watch sunsets. It won't be publicly owned, but we're not putting barricades up.
There was an odd-looking building on that last slide that I just wanted to ask.
Oh, go back.
This brown, it looks sort of like an entrance to a bomb shelter or something. It's a very
well, that was so the from the boardwalk down to the grade is 20 feet drop. And we had said from the beginning that if you were wheelchair bound, that we wanted you to be able to get from the sidewalk on North Avenue to the bike path at no more than 5% grade handicap access. But there was no way to transition that 20 feet. So we put in a That is proposed as a public elevator. We have since moved that public elevator a little bit to the left as you view it, and now it's in the corner of that building, and it's a 2-stop elevator, and it takes you from the boardwalk down to grade, and it'll be open to the public.
Mm-hmm.
So the rest of the way, if you went back to the site plan, so every place else we put there's a trail network that zigzags back and forth, and the reason it's zigzagging is so that we can maintain a 5% grade all the way to the bike path connection. But we just couldn't make that 20-foot drop. We just couldn't make it work. So the only way we can make it work is to put just right in the corner of Building C on that northwest corner. That's where there'll be a public elevator there. Elevator and a stair, but a public elevator for handicap use.
Just to clarify, because a member of the public asked, this property will link up with, but not attempt to replace, the existing Burlington bikeway, the rec path, the bike path, right? It complements it, and
just connects to it.
Yeah.
And this will end up being the only paved connection to the Burlington bikeway between Depot Street and Burlington High School. I mean, people have been navigating through this property on the trail, but you got to be reasonably able-bodied to get through there. So, so this is going to make. I mean, the public's been getting to North Beach through this property since I was a kid, about 125 years ago. So, so this will make a nice hardscape connection to the bike path from North Avenue.
Well, it's such a development of this scale is really is exciting and interesting, and there's so many pieces and questions. We could go on and on and on, but we have other business we need to attend to. I wanted to see Sarah before I did that. Is there?
It was just a quick question. I see what I think would be a dirt path or gravel path on the 12 acres, so you can also get to that without going through the middle of the development, right?
Yes, and that's something that the Parks and Rec Department wants to maintain. They want to maintain that trail network, and then ultimately it'll connect to the hardscape bike path. And that hardscape bike path will be owned by the city. Obviously, we'll build it, but it's going to be owned by the city.
Does this aerial show we don't see the lake, but is there one that shows the lake here?
I don't know if Jess has one that shows the lake. We do have
I don't have a site plan with the lake.
Yeah,
that's it. Yeah. Okay.
that blue thing is the lake.
Yeah, I got that one. Sure, and everything to the west. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Let's just see if there's any questions coming in from the public that didn't get answered. I think we've covered it. My apologies if we missed one, because there was quite a few coming in here. But there will be opportunities, because tell us what's next for your project as far as the regulatory process.
So we are constantly in the planning stages for the next building and the next building after that. So we make trips back to the planning office. Sometimes they're administrative, sometimes they go to the DRB, and that'll be a continual process. My guess is that we'll be back to the city for periodic amendments over the next 3 or 4 years as the fine details of buildings evolve. Once we, hopefully the council will support us in wanting to build more housing, and then we will plan accordingly. It'll give us direction and allow us to plan, for the long term as to, how many units in this building and that building. And so we really need an answer to this question for us to continue our planning process.
You're looking for us to pass something on to the council on the 18th of May, is that right?
As soon as it's convenient for you, yes.
That would be the soonest we possibly could. We have 2 meetings in May. They come May 11th and May 18th. Do I have that correct? I believe, I think I have that correct. I don't have a calendar right in front of me, but those are the dates I have. So it would be May 18th, and I will ask if we don't have a resolution in front of us, but is there a motion to ask staff to draft a resolution supporting the amendments to the development agreement that anyone in this committee would like to make?
Didn't we get a draft?
Oh, we have that resolution. Yes, thank you. Good point. We do. Yep. Yeah.
Brian, do I get to vote?
No, no voting here. Luke, is there anything you needed to add before we wrap this up? Procedo?
Sorry, I'm negotiating a more difficult committee member here. We transmitted some materials to this committee earlier, which Councilor Carpenter was referring to. It did include a resolution, a memo, and sort of the CEDO approval of this project. So we're recommending that this committee sort of recommend that to the full council to take this up. We think it is kind of a common sense approach to tackling really two important goals of one, more housing at multiple income levels, and a new accessible bike path. So we're sort of getting both of those out of this deal. And I'll say it has been a long process. I think Eric and Jessica can attest that sort of negotiating every aspect of the process with the city as the plan continues to unfold. It has been vetted by DPW, Planning and Zoning, CEDO, the mayor's office, and so on. So we're fully in support of this project. So that's all I wanted to share. So happy to take any questions, but I don't need.
Thank you.
Any more questions or comments from committee members before I guess we should take a vote on the resolution? I'll entertain a motion regarding the resolution if the council would like to make that.
I'll move that.
Is there a second?
I can second.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor, please raise your hand, actually, make it easier. Oh, looks like the ayes have it. It's unanimous. This will go to the council on May 18th with all the committee members as sponsors of the resolution, if that's acceptable.
And we should be prepared to make a similar presentation or answer same thing.
Perhaps the Reader's Digest version of this would be good.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate the time and effort, and always happy to answer questions and talk about Cambrian Rise because we're pretty excited about it. And I, as you know, live in the New North End, and so I got my heart and soul in this project. So.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all.
Yep.
Okay, am I allowed to leave now?
Yes.
You and Jessica can stay because it's so interesting, but you can also leave because there are.
I think I'm gonna go home.
Okay.
Yeah. Bye.
I think Luke McGowan is now going to give us a brief description of what is coming our way regarding some of the recovery resources that they hope to deploy.
Yes, and I'm going to attempt to also present something here. So can I go ahead and share my screen?
You can.
All right. And can you see this presentation?
Yep.
All right, and if I can, here we go. So yeah, just wanted to quickly, we're moving, essentially we're trying to identify what the greatest needs are as a result of this crisis and what our funding streams are to address them. And that involves some pretty involved process, which many of the council will be aware of. Working with community development block grants is not a simple process. We have an able team that is doing that now. So just to walk you through what we're doing, we are looking at about a $760,000 entitlement for entitlement year 2020. That's essentially for the implementation period that is beginning on July 1st. So that's kind of one pot of money that we've been considering. We also, in April of 2020, received an additional $450,000 through the CARES Act, which was the federal response to the coronavirus, directly into Burlington to use towards our response and recovery efforts. The COVID funds in particular, they will be submitted as a substantial amendment to our Entitlement 2019 plan. So there's lots of different years here. So if you are having trouble following any of it, please let me know. But essentially HUD has told us that making a substantial amendment to the 2019 plan will be the quickest way to get this work approved and get these dollars into the community as quickly as possible. And I can take questions at the end, but if you need to jump in, please do. So what the timeline we're working with right now is, and this is sort of a work in progress. Essentially, we've accepted the Entitlement 2020 applications. That process is complete. We convened the advisory board and essentially took the recommendations of the advisory board. That process is also complete. Now we are coming to you, the CDNR, for input on those allocations, and we're recommending that you kind of accept those recommendations of the advisory board. The next work is in advance of the May 18th City Council meeting. We are going to be presenting a revised citizen participation plan, a substantial amendment to the 2019 action plan, and a draft 2020 action plan. And this is all in order to use these COVID funds that have been granted to the city. So that brings us on target for a approval at the city level by Board of Finance and City Council on June 1st, and submission to HUD by June 5th, which then gives HUD 45 days to approve. They've told us they will move as expeditiously as possible, but that really puts kind of the earliest these dollars arrive into Burlington at around sort of that end of June, July timeframe. Also, especially for those who have worked with these funds before, this is a lightning fast approach to deploying these funds. And I should have recognized them at the beginning, but there's a great team at CEDO and in other departments working on this as well, who have developed this plan. To give you a little more understanding of what we're proposing, HUD has essentially said, Burlington and any community can revise their citizen participation plan to move quickly. The two kind of key elements of that are allowing virtual public hearings as opposed to in-person public hearings, much like this. And they've reduced the public comment period to less than 30 days. So it has to be at least 5 days. So we're proposing 15 days as a good middle amount, which is essentially the distance between the delta between the city council meetings upcoming to review, to take public comment. HUD, we've been working with HUD. It's hard to believe we're, I guess, 8 weeks, 9-10 weeks into this crisis, but sort of throughout we've been in almost daily, but weekly contact with HUD to figure out what can we do with our funds and how can we get them out into the community as quickly as possible. So they're continuing to give guidance on new waivers that are available. It's important to note too that they've lifted the public service cap of 15% for the entitlement years of 19 and 20. So including for the new funding, that $450,000, they have lifted that cap. So you can now spread those funds more flexibly. Okay. So to back up again, so what we're recommending and sort of the needs for these funding sources. So we have these two funding sources, the $760,000 from the 2020 entitlement and the new $450,000 funding source. We are essentially saying we should continue to fund the Plan 2020 activities, and we're asking for CDNR support there. That is, after an evaluation process to make sure that the nonprofits that had applied and requested and were allocated those dollars can still use those dollars, and think that reopening that process would actually slow down getting those dollars into the community. So we did kind of work through that, but right now we're suggesting keeping that as is. We are identifying 4 major areas of new activities at about $700,000, and those are listed here. So we're saying first and foremost, rental assistance. So a rental assistance fund as essentially a stopgap measure for renters and property owners that are trying to keep people in their homes. This is a way to get dollars out quickly so that renters can stay in those homes and continue to make rent. This is not the first option. There's federal support potentially coming for this effort. There's state support potentially coming for this effort. There's existing support, through various nonprofits for rental assistance. So what we'll do is make sure that those sources are tapped first, and then we'll rely on this stopgap fund, but we're confident that we will have that need. The other areas are small business relief. That's been, as I don't need to tell anyone, small businesses, especially those employing low and moderate income workers, are struggling to continue to retain those employees if they are retaining them at all. And so we see this as a very important aspect of our relief effort, is getting those dollars to those businesses and employers. We are also identifying 2 new needs: a low barrier shelter and a food access fund. And that's essentially the activity you've seen at North Beach Campground to house people who were previously at the Anu Place low barrier shelter. As a result of this crisis, had to be relocated to the North Beach Campground. We now see that there's going to be an ongoing need, and there has been a need for a more permanent solution to essentially year-round low barrier shelter. And we want to put funds towards making sure that's available. And then a food access fund, we've kind of been working with all of the nonprofits in our community to get food to people who need it most. We think that's going to be an ongoing need going forward. And I'll speed up here because I'm sure I'm getting the cane pretty soon. But essentially what we're saying is follow the advisory board recommendations for Entitlement 2020. Then we're going to use the COVID funds, essentially split 50-50 for rental assistance and small business support to micro enterprises. And as I'm sure you've already added up, so that's $500,000. Splitting it 50-50 is not, splitting the limited amount we have in COVID funds is not going to cover those funds. So we're going to add $340,000 from the city's emergency allocation, which was approved on March 23rd, to support both upping those 2 programs and the food relief fund and the low barrier shelter.
Earhart raised his hand. Did you see that?
Okay.
No, sorry.
Yeah, we'll get to that, but we're going to let Luke finish before we go into questions. But
okay,
we'll get to her as soon as, and committee members as well. Yeah.
Okay. And I'll move quickly here. And so this slide is essentially showing you what the advisory board recommendations allocations were for the 2020 CDBG funds. And this is the public service section of that. And so this is, again, it's normally at a 15% cap. There was there was more requested than was available to be awarded, and the board had to make difficult decisions about how I allocate those funds. This is the solution they came up with, which the city supports. And so you can review that here. And we'll get you this deck so that you have it to review afterwards as well. And this slide, so you're seeing essentially the other side of the 2020 entitlement, which is the development projects, and those are listed out here. Importantly, we did have enough funds in the development bucket to fund all of the requested applications. So this was a less difficult decision for the advisory board to make, but did, of course, they reviewed all the applications and found them all appropriate to be funded. And finally, as is the case every year, so these are the projects that CEDO is administering through the 2020 entitlement. And these include things like a construction job training program, neighborhood revitalization, micro enterprise technical assistance, our lead program. These are long-standing CEDO projects that, for the most part, almost all have become essentially the channel through which we're already doing a lot of COVID relief efforts through CEDO and the Resource and Recovery Center. So this is just one more detail slide on how we're approaching the Entitlement 2020 COVID funds. And again, if you're finding this hard to follow, I understand. But essentially, this is that $450,000 allocation that was new through the CARES Act. We are splitting that 50-50 rental assistance and small business relief. And the reason you're seeing it at 360, that is essentially the 20% administrative cost that the city, that CEDO takes essentially to pay for the administration and design of these programs. And this last slide is just showing you, so again, the $1 million emergency allocation that the council approved, that's been going to support the Emergency Operations Center, the Recovery and Resource Center, and a number of new initiatives like the Trusted Community Voices program or a emergency relief fund. We are now proposing another significant ask of that $1 million allocation of $340,000 to support these other priorities. And again, importantly, all of this is under these programs, their design, their focus is still being worked out, but we felt it was important to give you a sense of how we were approaching this problem and where we were in the process. So I will stop there and take any questions if they...
Thank you. Normally we jump to the committee, but I think there was a hand up that went up very early in the presentation, and I'm going to see if staff can help me call up, enable Earhart to speak, because his hand went up early on, and since he has usually information from the state and the federal level, it'd be helpful if Earhart could speak. So go ahead.
Thanks a lot, Brian. Really appreciate it. And Luke, nice meeting you via Zoom. I don't think we've had the chance to meet yet. For the record, Earhart Mako with the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition. Hi, Zoraya. Hi, Sarah. And also a Ward 1 resident, longtime Ward 1 resident. So just a couple of observations on the CD, the special funds. Really happy to see, pardon the dog in the background, really happy to see that you guys are dedicating a substantial portion of that to rental assistance, which pretty much looks like your plan kind of mirrors what the state is doing, which is interesting, sort of the one-third for microbusiness, for rental, and then for some special community facilities. Question about the rental assistance is that going to be administered through CEDO or not? Some of our nonprofits who are going to be experiencing rental income losses, like Cathedral Square. Sorry.
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Earhart.
Are the nonprofits going to be eligible for that, or is it going to go directly to renters? Are you guys administering that at CEDO? And I guess one other just observation. One of the reasons I'm asking is because obviously state CDBG dollars, which are also kind of rental assistance, will not be eligible to be used in Burlington. And so I just want to make sure that you guys have that covered.
Thank you.
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah, Luke, if you could, yeah.
Yes, so good questions, Earhart. And it's, part of what we've been doing is also included essentially weekly and daily contact with the state and how they're allocating their funds. And so we have been tracking that. We did work to try to get access to some of the state funds for the work here in Burlington. I know there's a long history there that we don't need to go into, but it's, we felt that approach made sense for our needs, and we are actively working through the program design, and I think it's a very real option that it would be managed outside of CEDO. But we're certainly prepared or preparing to manage it inside of CEDO if we think there's a need to do that. But I think CEDO works best in partnership with all of the nonprofits here in Burlington. So that's what we're doing. So we're reviewing, working hard, but we did want to start the process of setting aside the money so that it was available as early as possible. So whether this allows us flexibility to manage the program within the city or work with a partner.
Well, great. I figured you were in constant contact with them, but I just thought I'd ask a quick follow-up question. So the coronavirus relief funds, this is the $1.25 billion that the state is receiving through the CARES Act. Some of that could be used in Burlington. And I know the League of Cities and Towns has put in a request for a fairly substantial chunk of that. I'm just wondering if Burlington is part of that request, and whether you're looking to some of those funds maybe to supplement some of what you're trying to do, especially for Burlington's renters.
Mm-hmm. Another great question, and we've been actively, I wouldn't say aggressively, but adequately aggressively making requests of the state that we think are reasonable and needed for Burlington, and that includes sort of specific asks on that $1.25 billion allotment to fund essentially the recovery center work to get these funds out. So if we were using city fund, this city emergency allocation to fund a rental relief program, we're hoping to get some, if not all of that reimbursed through the state process. But as of now, all of that is sort of in motion. And I'm sure you're following the news that, the state is trying to figure out all of this on the fly as well.
Councilor Carpenter, you had your hand up, so I'm going to recognize you.
Two questions, Luke. One, I don't see anything about foreclosure assistance, and I really strongly encourage us to do this. Right now, it's sort of funded, but not really by the homeownership center. Mm-hmm. Nobody really pays for foreclosure counseling. The homeownership center really lives on pre-purchase counseling, which they're not going to be doing much of. I don't think we're going to see the foreclosure stuff hit till later in the fall. It takes significantly longer to get into a foreclosure. And I think the banks will try to work it out so it'll be fall or winter. But over half of the lending institutions in Vermont are out-of-state firms, and managing that process is really, really difficult unless kind of know what you're doing. And I don't know that it has to be a big amount of money, but I would just strongly encourage a conversation, probably with the homeownership center, around some amount of money, because it's a huge handle. And we went through it with the recession when you had really difficult servicers to connect with. And so I just encourage us to put some amount of resources into that. So. I probably should have mentioned it before now. I raised that idea with Michael Monti as well, and I just think you need to be prepared. And I think it's a skill set that would be greater than anybody at the recovery center now would have. I mean, you really need to understand all the wonderful nuances of mortgage loan servicing. The other question was around the money for the low barrier shelter, which I absolutely support, but now that I'm wearing a Burlington hat and not a state hat, will you be getting will there be other resources outside of Burlington going to the shelter itself? Yep.
So, and to your first question and point very well taken. We've, throughout been thinking about this as, it's like renters certainly are, the nature of the problem is affecting everybody, at every level. And so the city response has to address that in some way. So that's, that point well taken. And so we'll all get you some information on how we're thinking about foreclosure assistance. Your second question, which I'm now, remind me, I'm sorry. So
was the low barrier
The low-barrier
shelter,
shelter.
and who else is contributing besides Burlington? And this is my editorial comment, which is to say the homeless problem is not just Burlington. So,
so no question.
Yeah.
And certainly we're currently in the process of evaluating what the cost of a low-barrier shelter would be. And it doesn't take a genius to figure out that $100,000 would not cover that at all. But we've been in conversations even with the state this week about funding something over the long term. So that would essentially be the city match towards a significant investment by the state in this effort.
One of the things that before the COVID crisis really went into full swing was word that Burlington Housing Authority was receiving a fairly significant number of new rental assistance vouchers, also known as Section 8 vouchers. Is that something that anybody who's on this Zoom meeting knows about, and whether there will be a significant increase in Section 8 vouchers available through the Burlington Housing Authority?
I think Todd is in the audience here and would be best positioned to answer that question if he's able.
Sure. I think Ian is the man behind the curtain right now, helping us.
Well, Earhart might know as well.
Can you hear me?
Yep, Todd is on. Great. Got
it. I'm not aware of having spoken with the director and Liz Whitmore over at BHA. I'm not aware of them having received a substantial number of new vouchers, but that's certainly something that we can loop back to the committee and just double check that.
I think that would be really helpful. There's literally a need for a full-time person at BHA that needs to literally go find apartments that are suitable and available for people who have Section 8 vouchers, because if somebody gets a voucher and can't place it, can't use it and put it into service, they only have a certain amount of time to do that, and eventually they lose it and it goes back into the pool, if you will. So that's an area where it takes a lot of work to help people who have a Section 8 but can't find an apartment that meets the housing quality standards and the rent levels and everything, and you find an owner willing to rent to someone with Section 8. So that's a piece of work that they need help with, and BHA will make that known if you talk with Laura Zelliger, the director.
Yeah, just to build on that point, HUD has only very recently provided waivers to allow BHA to do the initial inspections. So the pandemic has actually, for some period of time, prevented folks from using new Section 8 vouchers. And it seems that the inspection requirements are being loosened up a little bit, but which is good news. But I'll get back to you about the availability issue.
Brian, I don't know if I'm unmuted, but I can add to this.
You are now. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm just recalling from some of the Zoom conferences I've been on. I think Laura was on last Friday. I don't believe that they've received, Laura Zelliger, I don't believe that BHA has received any new general purpose Section 8 vouchers. That I may be forgetting. They may have received some special purpose vouchers, but I don't think so. Laura has also said that they have been maintaining some units vacant as overflow in case they have additional folks that test positive with COVID-19, so that they could move folks into isolation. The other thing is that the big $11 billion tranche of money for HUD that came through the CARES Act does have money for public housing in it to help them with some of their increased operating costs as a result of additional cleaning and additional hazard pay for staff that has public contact and is at higher risk. And then obviously also there's a large tranche of money in there for folks who have Section 8 currently that have experienced a loss of income as a result of the coronavirus. and are not covered through unemployment benefits, for example. And so they can have interim recertifications. And as Todd mentioned, there's a bunch of different waivers that come through from HUD to allow for those interim recertifications to happen in a remote kind of environment without actual physical inspections of the units, without physical signatures. People can self-certify their lowering of income as long as the housing authority comes back within, I think it's by the end of the year, to certify the decrease in income. So there's a number of different waivers. I haven't followed all of them, but people who are experiencing lower income should be able to have their Section 8, if they're a voucher holder, adjusted so their subsidy is higher to compensate for the loss of income.
Thank you. Okay. I realize we have used up our the allotted time for our meeting without getting to our committee priorities. And what would you like to do, Councilors Hightower and Carpenter, with our remaining time?
So I had a few questions for Luke still.
Yeah.
I know that we also had a few questions in the chat that weren't answered. So again, I don't know how committee meetings usually go, but
yeah. Why don't you go for the questions for Luke, and I'll look while you're doing that, I'll look at the chat and try and.
Okay. So first question is the 20% administration fee, which I have to say is a very reasonable administration fee. So I don't mean to like knock that or question it, but it sounded like you weren't 100% sure how the rental assistance would be administered. So if CEDO ends up not doing that administration, does that go away if it ends up outsourcing that to something else? One, and two, I couldn't quite piece together where all the funding streams were coming from and how much that added to. That was just from the $1 million, like 1-point-something million dollar emergency funds, but was that on all of the funds that are for the rental assistance and small micro business assistance, or I wasn't quite sure.
Yeah. So to the second question first, so the and I totally understand why it would be confusing. It took me a while to understand this. So we were essentially looking at 3 pots of money: the entitlement 2020 allocation, the COVID 450 allocation, and the emergency allocation of $1 million as our sources across all of these programs. And that's kind of how we evaluated it. And we essentially said, let's take the 2020 entitlement and leave it as is. And so split the program, the programs that we're suggesting among those 2 sources. And the reason we're breaking it down in the way we are, and I know we're pressed for time, but it's essentially CDBG has restrictions on it that make them more difficult. There's layers of complexity to deploy those funds. And so we're allocating them based on what we think will be quickest and easiest to get out into the community. So that's how we made the choices about how to match the sources to the programs.
Mm-hmm.
To your first question, so the 20% administrative fee, it's not only for the rental assistance program, but for all of the administration of the new funds. So we are also designing a small business relief fund, and we are also figuring out so we've already launched a pilot food access fund, and we're administering that now. So that's, it's not specific to the rental assistance fund, but it's across the uses of, the use of that funding stream.
Right. Sorry. My question was more, is the 20% applied to all 3 of the funding supply, I guess, both the ENT and the CARES and the emergency city fund?
Yeah. So not to the emergency fund, though we are using that to pay for some staff time associated with the EOC and the RRC.
Mm-hmm.
But for the entitlement 2020 year, my understanding is so that's effectively how a big way CEDO funds itself is through federal grants, namely through CDBG funds. And so those 2 sources, that's how we're doing it.
And then, I guess I can also just, I assume I can, again, new to committees, I can assume I can follow up with you once we have the PowerPoint with just you. So I don't necessarily need to ask everything in committee.
Yep. I encourage you to reach out anytime.
Then I will not take everyone's time and ask my many questions later.
Thanks. Great. Yeah, there was a couple suggestions coming in as part of the chat. One was that there will be a need for essentially legal representation once the eviction moratorium, which I believe the governor, it went to his desk today. I actually don't know the outcome. I haven't been able to follow that. Maybe somebody else does, but that is only a temporary moratorium on evictions. And once that is has expired, that there will be, unfortunately, a fair amount of filings have already taken place, that will take up time and will require legal representation. I don't have an answer for that because it's a question of, with limited funds, where do we put those funds? But I think that's it's an important point that we need to just keep in mind. Councilor Carpenter and then Hightower.
I don't know if Earhart can answer this. There is money being floated around at the state level for Vermont legal aid, and it would be regional. It wouldn't be specific for Burlington, but I don't know where that sits, but it's also being recognized statewide. And, I would encourage us to be advocating or try to figure out where that sits.
Thanks for that point. That's a good one. Yeah. Councilor Hightower.
Yeah, also along those lines, this is the question that maybe I should ask now because I think the public would care about this, is along those lines. I don't know how long the moratorium on evictions is going to last, but how quickly are we planning on getting the rent relief funds out? Because I assume the best way to kind of stop eviction proceedings is just to pay up. So in terms of timing, when we think that moratorium might end versus how quickly we can get those funds out, and not just, I assume there's going to be different rounds where maybe there's a round of the first month's check and then there's a second round for this another month's rent. So how you see that?
Yeah, and so short answer is as quickly as possible. The slightly longer answer is, there are so as I laid out, even if we kind of were moving literally as quickly as possible, we wouldn't have those dollars in hand for a certain amount of time. We have been working with there's a number of nonprofits that do offer rental assistance, and correct me, Todd, if I'm wrong, or anyone else on my team, so CVOEO has a program of rental assistance that, as of last week, I think it had not been tapped out, so as we get calls to the RRC, we direct people to those resources first because that will be the quickest way to get those dollars into people's hands. So as of now, the demand that, as we understand it, is being met by the current sort of nonprofit apparatus to supply those needs. And we see the city's job as to backstop if those funds run out or if certain people's needs aren't being met by those programs. Does that answer your question, Councilor?
It does.
Councilor Carpenter, do you have something on that that you wanted to add?
Just that, again, there is a little bit of state back rent money floating around, but that's, I think, what CVOEO uses.
Okay, yeah. I don't want to short shrift us. I can go on for a few more minutes, but I want to be respectful of other committee members and staff and the public that joined this meeting. We had a period of time where we couldn't meet. We are now meeting for the first time in this cycle of 2020. So I think I'm willing, if you all are willing, to kind of ramp it up and maybe go every 2 weeks for a while to try and get a handle on some of the tenant protection issues were at the top of our agenda as a committee in February, and then a bunch of things just happened and we had to postpone all that, and it's urgent that we get back to it. I feel a sense of urgency. I think you all share that. So just want to put that out there that we look for a date in 2 weeks.
That sounds great.
Yeah. 2 weeks from today would be May 13th.
20th.
20th.
Oh, I'm sorry, the 20th. That's it. Yeah.
Works for me.
And if we went out just to plan ahead, 2 weeks from there gets us into June.
June. Okay for me.
I mean, the work of the council will be really start to pick up, but I think we have, you know, a sense of urgency here to deal with this. We're in a moment of crisis, so I think it's something we should plan at least for the next few weeks. So where would that land us if we went to the first week of June on that Wednesday?
That's the 3rd.
And then we've got some requests on the chat asking what time we're thinking.
We typically have done these at 5:30 if that works for you counselors. I'm just checking with you now to see.
I would have a
Works for
slight
me.
preference to, go ahead, Sarah.
I just said it works for me.
Okay, I would have a slight preference to moving it to 6, just to get a little bit of a break between
It's fine.
work.
Get a
and-
bite to eat and stuff, sure.
Yeah.
Like we can do that. And there's always a meeting room because we're meeting virtually. I do look forward to scheduling our first meeting in the Busher conference room though.
Yes.
What was
Okay.
what was the June date that you just said?
June 3rd.
Okay.
And we will map out a plan, you know, at that meeting of meeting dates. And, you know, I think it's safe to say that our top priority is grappling with the tenant protection issues, though. I think there's a lot of work there.
And Luke or somebody, or you will send us some of the background material?
I think
Yes.
it's-
Yeah, Ian has all that, but yeah.
Okay, Ian, yeah.
and it's also on the CDNR website, I think.
It is.
Oh, okay.
It's been well archived there, yes. Yep.
Yeah, I'll just put it all together so that you can get it in an email.
Okay, great.
All right, thanks for bearing with us. It took us a little longer. Maybe I'll crack the whip a little more, but thanks.
The virtual whip.
Yeah. All right. I think we're signing off. Thank you, folks.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thanks all for joining.